Hi, I'm Elaine Engelhardt from Utah Valley State. Welcome to class today. We're still in our business ethics section, but moving into a favorite area where we discuss literature that ties into business ethics. And with us today is Professor Larry Harper. Larry, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure always to be with you, Elaine.
Thank you. And let me introduce you to the students that we have. We have Kisper and Cassie over here, and over here we have John and Aaron. And Larry, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how it is that you enjoy putting literature with ethics?
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be here on this program and to meet the new students and to discuss things that I just find fascinating. Boy, a little bit of background on me. I have to say, I've just finished up my 20th year on this campus, and you don't stay 20 years if you don't enjoy it, so I'm just having a great time here.
Don't we have just great jobs, lots of day-to-day happiness.
Oh my gosh. And then to
students.
see how the college has changed in the past, well, the 20 years, the name changed. But let's get to the literature. Yeah, I find literature just a fascinating way to study ethics, because often in our classes already we've been probably looking at case studies. And essentially with literature that focuses on ethical issues, that's essentially what we're doing. So as we moved into the texts, the story and the play that we'll be reading today, I think it's important for us to look at details. And initially, what are the facts, and not rush to our conclusions, not even rush to any inferences yet and implications of things, and make sure that we get okay, or we agree that these are the details, these are the facts. And then, because if we, and then we can really start seeing what are the issues here, and before we start interpreting, because if we rush too fast, that's where sometimes the problems get going. We bring too much of our own views into it, which we want to have, but we also want to have that. We want to make sure that it's based on the real things.
Yes, that we stay true to Howard Fast and Henrik Ibsen. Yeah. And you'll just let the students know which passages you'd like them to read and what page numbers, and we'll just work through that quite smoothly,
okay.
I'm sure.
Great, looking forward to it.
Yes, any of you students have things that you'd like to tell us about today about these readings, or maybe Aaron, you could tell us a little bit about Howard Fast.
I'd love to. Howard Fast was actually born in 1914 and recently passed away. He actually passed away in 2003. So he lived a very long life, and he was very prolific. Wrote a lot of short stories. Wrote a lot for magazines and serials and those kinds of things. And the piece we're reading, The Cold, Cold Box, was actually written for a fantasy and science fiction magazine, which I thought was interesting. He was a communist. I'll just put it right out there, because he did too. He actually worked for Voice of America during World War II, but joined the Communist Party in 1944, and went on to win the Stalin Peace Prize, but then fell out of favor, or the Communist Party fell out of favor with him, I should say, considering conditions in the Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc countries after World War II. That was in the mid-50s, but not before his career had been rocky and shaken by, a stint with the House Un-American Activities Committee and some prison time for not telling who contributors were to an orphanage during the Spanish-American War. One of them just happens to be Eleanor Roosevelt, which I thought was kind of interesting. But most people know Fast for other works, like April Morning, which is something that's on a lot of junior high school reading lists or high school reading lists. It's about the battles of Lexington and Concord. And he actually in the 70s went on to live in California and wrote for How the West Was Won.
Isn't that fun?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I didn't either, but I thought it was really, really fascinating. And the one other thing that a lot of people know him for is he is the original author of, and he began it during his prison time, Spartacus. Okay.
And
which
with
became
the
movie, and yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So he's an interesting fellow, and had a lot to say about the society we live in, and the underdog, and and just a number of different social issues. And I think the cold, cold box is certainly no different.
Oh, it's intriguing. I really love the way that this story just kind of pulls us along, and then we find ourselves in such a quandary at the end. Truly, we have conflicting points of view. Anyone like to add anything to what Aaron has said about Howard Fast or the stories? Well,
Yeah, could I just add maybe a couple things to what Aaron mentioned? You mentioned his involvement with the Communist Party, and maybe for our students to let people know that that wasn't that uncommon.
Yeah.
That in the 30s and the 40s, a number of Americans and Europeans turned to the Communist Party, saw it as one of the most effective parties, political organizations, fighting the Nazis and the fascists. The other thing to say is, often during the 50s, many of those people who were in the Communist Party in the 30s and 40s became highly disillusioned with state-run communism, especially with the Eastern Bloc, the Iron Curtain, and those countries. And so it wasn't, that uncommon for someone like Fast.
truly, and he didn't want the Stalin Peace Prize after Stalin murdered so many of his
Right.
own. And so he certainly did back away from that when he could see that it wasn't remaining true to what would be seen as an ideal community, a utopia, a better way for people to live. And
Right.
and he's, wait, I don't want this. So.
Yeah, so, and then maybe moving into this, you said the story was initially published in a science and was it fantasy or?
Sci-fi.
The story is, as we've read it, futuristic, isn't it?
It is.
In fact, when I teach the story in my classes, I often give quizzes at the beginning of the class just to encourage those students to read it. And one of the questions I ask is, when did this story take place? Did anyone do the math?
I've forgotten. Would it be like 2065 or something like that?
2072, I think is what I came to.
2072,
But
okay.
65, so it's still in the future here with that. Let's see, maybe should we just have someone summarize just very briefly in just a few seconds what are the facts of this?
Who'd like to help us with that? What are the facts of the case? Well, I'd love to help out just a little bit with that, Larry. And what we have here then is this very interesting fellow. And he's born in poverty, he's an orphan, and he's able to, by fair means or foul, get some money and start putting together his own businesses and industry. And everything he touches turns to gold. And soon he has acquired a huge, huge empire. And he is not a nice man. And at the height of his empire, and he's acquired everything, this guy has diversity down. They'd be pleased with the portfolio this guy has, because he's got everything from media to mining to oil and plastics and chemicals, and you name it, he's got it.
And how he achieved it was through Machiavellian
Yes, very
methods,
Machiavellian
to try to
methods,
tie
like
in
we
with,
talked about in last class. And then he finds out he has the dreaded cancer, goes to his doctor and says, I don't want to die, and here's $1 million if you can keep me from dying.
And he's only, I think, about 45 years old at this time.
Yeah,
so
not
he's
very old,
right
just
at the prime of his life.
moving into the late 40s, and he doesn't want to go. And he says, I'll come back and, I'll kind of like give you a weekend to read over things, and I'll come back and you tell me how you're going to take care of this. So he comes back and the doctor says, I've been trying this, he doesn't call it cryogenics, but the freezing of different animals and snakes and even a spider monkey, and he says, so and then waking them back up again, and he said, and Kovac says, so you're going to kill me and bring me back? No, I just kind of, it's as if time stands still. So
you're not killed.
So we're kind of into this science fiction, and maybe one day it will be science, but right now it's still very much fiction. And he sets up a board of directors very carefully so that when he is thawed, he will be back in control of his billions and billions of dollars, and sets up a board of directors, and they are incredibly successful. they do everything right, and they figure out how to bring peace. And that's where I guess I bring my own reading into this, because maybe in bringing peace, they also bring a lot of prosperity. But to think that there are no more wars and that things are very good, but
it's very utopian. Maybe bringing it back to some of Fast's views on an ideal society.
Yeah, very ideal society. And maybe I'll just stop it there so I don't ruin the plot.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. He was born in 1913, I think it is, and in 1958-59 is when he's diagnosed with cancer. Okay. Let's see, what I'd like to do is maybe, if we could read just the opening paragraph, because as I initially said, I wanted to take a careful look at some of the details and some of the underlying tones of the piece, as well as the details here. Would anyone like to read just the very opening paragraph of the essay, or of the story, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll read it. As always, the annual meeting of the Board of Directors convened at 9 o'clock in the morning on the 10th of December. 9 o'clock in the morning was a sensible and reasonable hour to begin a day's work, and long ago the 10th of December had been chosen as a guarantee against the seduction of words. Every one of the directors would have to be home before the Christmas holiday, or its equivalent, and therefore the agenda was timed for precisely 2 weeks and not an hour more.
Okay. When I read this, there are actually three words that jumped out at me.
Seduction of words.
Seduction of words, and then, well, I should say phrases, three phrases. Seduction of words, as opposed to, was a sensible and reasonable hour. Sensible and reasonable. And with ethics, with philosophy, one of the emphasis that we have is we want to be rational, using reason, and not be seduced by other things. And then there's one more word there, capitalized, Christmas, right?
Christmas.
Okay.
Big break.
Connotative words. I'm trying to do a little bit of a literature lesson here of how certain words help to convey and enhance, certain tone and feeling. What do we associate with Christmas?
Happy times.
Happy. Charity,
Holidays,
right?
yes.
Holidays
Charity.
and charity and the spirit of Christianity.
And some time off, too.
Yeah.
We're going to get some time off.
So, and compassion. I'm thinking of these things here. So, okay, trying to deal with some of that. I feel like moving on a little bit to the plot, just to summarize a little bit here. Because in 1959, Steve Kovac, diagnosed with cancer. He makes an agreement. He makes an agreement with the doctor to be frozen, and as soon as a cure is found for his cancer, to be thawed out, shall we say. And he gives the physician $1 million. Says, here's for your research and your own research, and then anything else that you need to keep me, you've got a blank check to cure me, and I'll give you another $1 million after the cure is found and you bring me back. So they made an agreement. Okay. There's a philosopher that we've read who emphasizes promise keeping. Who's that? Immanuel Kant. Okay, so we're reading literature, but we want to tie it in with the ethical, people here. So we've got on one hand, promise keeping. Immanuel Kant says, if I make a promise, I have a duty to keep that promise. Could I universalize that if I make an agreement, a promise, that everyone could break it out of their own convenience or for whatever reason? And if I can't universalize that, I have to say no. Okay, so according to Kantian ethics, categorical imperative, what must the doctor do after the cure is found?
Must wake him up.
He must wake him up, has to wake him up, according to at least that type of thing. Okay, as you read the story, and I will summarize here, in 1971, I think it is, the doctor dies, but it's like 29 years later, so we're up to the year 2010, just around the corner now. Boy, wouldn't this be wonderful?
Yes.
All cancer has been cured.
All cancer has been cured.
And including Steve Kovac's type of cancer. So in 2010, but wait a minute, this story is taking place in 2072.
What happened?
they don't wake him up. Okay. Now, when you're in the ethics class, Kant is one philosopher. He's a major philosopher, but he's not the only guy in the book.
Right.
There are others. Okay. Aaron, you look like you're about ready to say something.
He's not, and I think that what this short story is going to quite aptly point out is that there are other philosophies to look at in which it's not a matter of necessarily the universalization of the categorical imperative that we're concerned with, but maybe say the greatest good for the greatest number.
Well, I've heard that. Is that what philosophers?
Utilitarian perspective there.
Oh, John Stuart Mill, yes.
Yeah, so, you know, I think maybe that could be something that is pulled into this short story.
Okay, and that's one thing we want to be doing with ethical issues, ethical dilemmas, is not, not just go and embrace the first thing that comes to your mind. Bring that in, play with it, wrestle with it, and then other philosophies that would support the other one. Okay, so this greater good. What is the greater good? Which one trumps?
Who are you going to let trump here, Kisper?
I don't know. You have to look at all the facts, I suppose, and what the consequences would be of bringing him back, and why they haven't so far.
What is the greater good?
So we've got one that's going to say consequences, and one that's going to say no consequences. So what are the consequences, which would be the greater good, long-term effects, and now we do it because we ought to. We made a promise, the principle, we have a duty. Yeah, and so Kisper is going to say, what are all these consequences? And what's going to bring about this greater good? And boy, are we looking at a greater good in this story. I mean, we've got the whole world happy.
Why don't we? I mean, let's give those, the justifications on that side of the argument. Why would we not revive Steve Kovac?
Ben, go ahead.
John.
If the company has been successful in creating kind of a world peace situation, and he comes back and he takes over this company, there might be dire consequences in so far as it would just ruin the utopia that has been created. So.
Okay, that's one. How about you, Cassie? What could be another dire consequence here?
Just his tyranny coming back, and
ruthless man,
right.
And he's very tyrannical. Kisper.
Well, it could ruin the whole company, the whole, like John said, the whole utopian society.
Okay.
And the good of everybody.
Okay, because we don't know what this one guy is going to do.
Let's actually have us read a passage
from
the text right now. In fact, I noticed it is on the screen, but it's on page 425.
Okay.
The left-hand column, the first full paragraph that begins, how an individual achieved this. So we're talking about how did Steve Kovac achieve this wealth. Would you like to read that, John?
Yeah. Okay. How an individual achieved this in a time of the public corporation and the corporation man is a singular tale of drive and ambition. Steve Kovac was ambitious, ruthless, merciless, and utterly without compassion or pity. His policy was to destroy what stood in his way, if he could. If he could not, he bent it to his will in one way or another. He wrecked lives and fortunes. He framed and entrapped his competitors. He used violence when he had to. When he could not buy or bribe what he wanted, he corrupted individuals and bribed parliaments and bought governments. He erected a structure of power and wealth and control that reached out to every corner of the globe.
Wow, isn't that big, Aaron? Tell us a little bit about it.
It is, but I'd like to contrast it with something, if I may.
Okay.
If you turn to page 427, on the far right-hand column, in not the last paragraph, but the second to last paragraph, they're describing what the board of directors did in order to achieve world peace.
Does it seem to be pretty close?
We bought and bribed and framed. We infiltrated the parliaments of all mankind. We bought the military commanders. We dissolved the armies and the navies in the name of super weapons, and then we destroyed the super weapons in the name of mankind. Where leaders could not be bought or bribed, we brought them into our board. And above all, we bought control control of every manufacturing, farming, or mining unit of any consequence upon the face of the earth.
So Aaron, what have we got going here? People who know better for us, know better about what will, because the one, he's doing it for himself, but now we've got this big board who's kind of running everything for us.
Well, and I think that's interesting. I mean, who am I to deny that in the just in that next paragraph, they say wars, armies, navies, atom bombs, all of these were only ugly memories. I mean, we all would agree that those things are things we would rather see not happen.
It took them 29 years.
But the similarity between the language, I think, that FAST is using there between what Kovac did and what the Board of Directors does is not unintentional.
No,
Yes.
it's not. But could we say that maybe one is a dictator and one is a republic, so to speak?
A benevolent dictator?
Okay, so the second one we're going to call a benevolent dictator or a dictatorial republic, maybe? I don't know, because, you know, this group, they charter themselves to kind of take over the world.
And they are certainly
for
are
the
more
best of
intentions than
intentions.
Steve Kovac, the individual. They have the 300 members. It's very careful to say that every
Every
creed,
race,
religion,
culture,
race, nation, culture is represented. So there is a kind of republic to it, but I still can't get past the eerie quality of that language.
Can we look at, you began reading from that one paragraph. Let's go up about 4 lines above,
Okay.
where he says, the director who's conducting the meeting says,
Okay.
we used the weapons of Steve Kovac. Let us be honest and admit that. We acted as he would have acted, but out of different motives entirely. Does motive make a difference? Does our intention?
In
Is that
what
another
ethic
factor?
system? In what ethic system is it? Does your motive make a difference in deontology or consequentialism? It's go ahead, Ben. John.
May as well just keep calling me Ben.
Just changed your name.
Well, I mean, in Kant, motive really is everything. But then when we're talking about, if we're going to talk about the categorical imperative, there's no way to justify the weapons of Steve Kovac within. I mean, if we're looking at it from the perspective of the categorical imperative, but in a sense, it's a very do the ends justify the means situation here, because the board of directors, their ends really, they succeeded in bringing about world peace and so on, but Steve Kovac used it for completely selfish means. And so, I mean, I think that debate has to be brought into it as well.
Okay, and also we're back to this notion of we made a promise.
Yeah. So we've got the dilemma. We've thrown at least a few of the arguments on the table for us to discuss this. Are we ready to vote?
No.
I am curious though, but
I also have a question. Is it, I mean, he made the deal with the doctor, but the doctor has died at this point.
Right.
So what obligation do they have to bring him back? Did he make an agreement with the board as well, or just the doctor to bring him back?
Would any of you like to read where we go into that, Aaron?
I think and I'm trying to find the quote, but I'm pretty sure it is mentioned that the board of directors, not only do they exist because of, like at the will of Steve Kovac, at least in their inception, but that it is the nature of that board that, like, their first bylaw is that when that cure for cancer is found, that Steve Kovac would then step in. I mean, the director says somewhere in here that the point of them is that they exist not so that Steve Kovac ever loses control of his company, but so that they can be a placeholder for him, which makes it much more, makes Steve Kovac even more diabolical. He doesn't care what they do in his absence, so long as when he comes back, they've been successful enough to at least have what he used to have.
retain the wealth and the power.
Yes. In
we
fact,
had.
it's found on page 426, second
Thank you,
column.
Elaine.
And Cassie, it's the very last paragraph. There's a little bit more about it, but basically it's saying that he's putting his affairs in order. And believe me, Steve Kovac knows how to put his
Right.
affairs in order. And do you want to read that very last paragraph
Sure.
for us?
In other words, he formed a single holding company for all of his many interests. He gathered together a board of directors to manage that holding company in his absence, making himself president in absentia with the substitute president to preside while he was gone. He made a set of qualifying bylaws that no president could hold office for more than 2 years, that the board was to be enlarged each year, and a number of other details, each of them aimed at the single goal of retaining all power to himself. And because he was not dead, but merely absent, he created a unique situation, one unprecedented in the history of finance.
And I'm going to have you tell us a little bit in the next paragraph too, because he's even gone into tax law here.
This holding company was exempted from all the traditional breaks and tolls placed upon previous companies through the mechanism of death. Until Mr. Kovac returned, the holding company was immortal. Naturally, Dr. Frederick was placed upon the board of directors.
Okay, so he thinks he's got this pretty well tied
Covered.
up. Yeah, he's going to have everything that was his, as Aaron pointed out, when he's thawed. So he's expecting to be thawed. He thinks he's got an agreement also
Yeah.
with the board.
Right. And it is the first item of business.
Always
At
the
their
first
annual
item
meeting.
of business.
There's another ethicist I'd like to bring in right
Okay.
now, Thomas Hobbes, and his social contract. And he's instrumental in constitutional, law, and near the end of at least the essay that we read on him, he talks about his definition of justice. And he says something to the effect, paraphrasing, that justice is the keeping of a covenant, a contract. Injustice is breaking one. And at least in my discussions, we talk about, well, that's you have an obligation to obey the law of the land, because anarchy, which was the time period, which was what was very predominant in his time period, he was really interested in keeping order. And injustice was that breaking of a contract. So Hobbes would say, so relating that, I didn't write or sign the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, but he suggests, or implies anyway, that just that you are a citizen of the country, you are bound to obey those laws. So even though Dr. Frederick has passed on, and many of these people on the board of directors did not sign that agreement, make that agreement, they're still bound, according to, I would think, the social contract.
And they perfunctorily say this too.
Yeah.
At the beginning. You can tell they're not taking it very seriously, but they perfunctorily state this at the beginning, and in fact even bring him into the meeting.
Yes, reel him in, yeah.
Yeah, at some point. Aaron.
Well, I think this also raises the question of illegal versus immoral. Yes, it's certainly, without a doubt, and the director flat out says it in the story, that this is illegal for them to not unthaw Steve Kovac.
Each year we take part in a crime.
Exactly. But is it immoral for them to not unfreeze?
This is when law and morality, when they collide, most of the time. Usually, morality and law are parallel, but not always. And we've had so many examples throughout history. Even our own country took almost 100 years before slavery was outlawed. The right to vote of everyone, depending, regardless of gender, race, economic standing. So I mean, things are changing, and it's because we've recognized that those laws sometimes conflict with our view of morality.
I really
this.
I really like how you've brought in then Immanuel Kant, you've brought in John Stuart Mill and Thomas Hobbes, who says we must keep our covenants, we must keep our promises made. Without them, it's vain. So he's going to say we have to do this. So now we're really in a conundrum here. What are we going to do, Larry? What would you have us do?
I want to find out what we're going to do.
Okay.
For 62 years, they have been voting to keep him frozen. it seems like it's a utilitarian decision. Where do you swing? Where do you fall on this?
And how is he going to react when he wakes up and knows that he's been kept frozen for
Many
another
ruthless
62 years?
people have a short temper as well.
Yes.
So that probably should be added to the mix as well. Okay, is anyone willing to show their hand?
Well,
Go ahead, Cassie.
Oh, I think that everyone's natural inclination is to, well, not everyone's, but I think a lot of times our natural inclination is towards utilitarianism. Everything's great. Why would we want to change this? And I think that's my natural reaction is keep them down. Why not?
Okay. We've got a good situation here. Let sleeping dogs or frozen people lie.
Yeah. How about you, Erin?
Well, I want to go straight to the very end of the text where the president or the interim president or the director says, so he sleeps from year to year, no difference, no changes. And he says, and skipping a few lines, they committed the first of 62 crimes. They took no action in the face of a promise, a duty, a legality, and almost sacred obligation. Can we understand them? Can we forgive them? Can we forgive the board that voted the same decision again and again? Above all, can we forgive ourselves if we stain our honor, break the law, and ignore our own inheritance of an obligation? I am not here to argue the question. It is never argued. The facts are presented, and then we vote. Therefore, will all those in favor of awakening Mr. Kovac raise their right hands? And they wait. Long moments became minutes, no hands were raised. He's wheeled out, and that's the end. I think it's important that they don't say, does anyone object? They don't ask for objections. They don't ask for reasoning. They don't ask for any arguments in the contrary. They don't look for anything like that. All they say is those in favor of awakening Mr. Kovac raise their right hands. And I think it's interesting that there are only 7 new members in this party of 300. So it's really their vote because all of the other people have already voted to maintain this. And so I think it's interesting how FAST is setting this up. There's an element of peer pressure. There's an element of just the language that he's using and the question that he's using. I think given the overwhelming amount of information and the way that he's phrased it and the 300 other people to the 7 or the 293 to the 7, I don't know that I could raise my hand, and I don't know if I could form an objection to it worthy of the argument for it in that short amount of time.
Yeah. You know, I'm glad you read that last passage. It says, I am not here to argue the question. And of course, in philosophy, when we use the word argue, we're not talking about quarreling or shouting.
Right.
We're talking about building arguments. And so it's, I'm not here to argue the question. It is never argued. And the reason I had us read that opening passage, the first paragraph, says, we are here, I forget the actual
settle the
passage.
question?
To be reasonable,
hour.
sensible and reasonable, but they're not.
That's true.
It's very emotion-based. Well, yeah.
So, Erin, your vote goes where?
Honestly, just from a very personal perspective, again, to admit it, I'd have to vote to keep him frozen. I don't know if I'm okay with the unilateral decisions made by the board of directors. I don't know if I'm okay with the assumption of Steve Kovac's means of making those things happen. I don't know. But at the same time, there are some very fundamental things there. I mean, people aren't dying. The world is a better, safer place for people. And I mean, I don't know. That's a real struggle.
Yeah,
I'd probably, in the situation, as a new member of the board, I would have to not raise my hand.
So the peer pressure would work on you.
I have to admit, probably in this situation it would.
Okay.
Anyone else want to admit? Kisper or John?
I'd vote to unfreeze him, actually.
Okay,
I
tell us
honestly
why.
would.
Good. I love disagreement.
And maybe it's my tendency as a philosopher to kind of argue the question, but I mean, if the company has really achieved world peace and so on, and I don't see the harm in waking him up, because Steve Kovac introduced into a world that has changed so much and has become peaceful. Where would his place be at that point? And how would the world react to him? It's almost like they would react saying there is no place for this behavior here. And if the board is truly, if they have faith in what they've accomplished and what they've created, then perhaps there would be no threat in introducing a Steve Kovac into the world, reintroducing a Steve Kovac.
John, I'm interested in the comments that you made, because you're bringing in, we've gone beyond now just the facts of the matter.
Yeah, we have.
And now we're saying, okay, now there's some futuristic things that he's been frozen for 120 years.
If nothing else, he might be loony bins by now, and we could just stick him in a home.
People go into a coma for 6 months, they come back, and it's like, whoa, it takes them 6 years to adjust.
I don't think I'd have a problem with that. If he came out loony bins and we put him in a home, who cares? But I think, let's unfreeze him because we said we would.
I shouldn't use that, it's probably.
Yeah, his characteristic and his personality, could he not overcome that possibly and take over this and say, well, I'm in charge now and everything is in the name of the board as far as the people are concerned, and he's some tyrant that takes over. We don't know what will happen.
So where are you going to vote, Kisper?
I'm going to keep him frozen.
Okay,
I don't know.
we got a 3 to 1
That's
here. What do you think about that, Larry?
Am I supposed to show my hand?
Unless you'd like to. Would you like to tell us?
No, I prefer not to, but I would like to maybe just throw a few other things out. Because the opening passage I had us read, I think reason is critical to this. And I appreciate hearing, and that's what we've been doing here for the past, 20, 25 minutes. On page 428, there's another passage that the very first time I read this story that made me squirm a little bit. It's on page 428. It is the last full paragraph, so it's actually about a little more than halfway down. It says, yes, he owned the world. Think of it. For the first time in history, a just peace governed the nations of mankind. Boy, that sounds wonderful. Cities were being rebuilt. Boy, that sounds good. Deserts turned into gardens. Jungles cleared. Poverty and crime a thing of the... Wait a minute. Jungles cleared. And I think of some of the problems, environmental problems, are the rapid disappearance of jungles, the rainforests. And he's presenting this as something desirable. And on one hand, we can see, yes, taming and subduing the land, but jungles cleared, is there no check on that? And then I get wondering about this. We never argue this, we're not really discussing it. And I wonder if even with the 300 people out of, we've got 6.5 billion right now. And I'm wondering if 300, 100, or 300 or one person.
Really that much different
If there's that much difference. Yeah, they're still guiding and directing the world without a full discussion.
I could get even more.
So maybe that doesn't answer the question of thawing out Steve Kovac, but I'm wondering about some rearrangement of how the world is run, even though their perception of ideal is their interpretation of it.
And and these careful reads are so important, just as Larry had us do on this piece. And on our next piece, we have just enough time in the class period to do it as well, by Henrik Ibsen, called An Enemy of the People. And once again, it takes a careful read. The tough thing about it is we're just jumping right into the middle. This is an excerpt from this outstanding play, and I hope that you'll go back and read the entire work by Henrik Ibsen, as well as others. He's just one of the most truly seen as one of the most incredible playwrights in history. And I asked Erin if she'd do a little background on Henrik Ibsen for us. Can you tell us a little bit about him?
Sure. Again, he was born in 1828, died in 1906, so he's certainly earlier than Fast. He was born in Norway and was always considered a Norwegian playwright and part of the Norwegian Renaissance kind of an idea. But he did spend a lot of his life in Germany and Italy as well. And he wrote a couple of very famous plays, Peer Gynt being one of them. And then he wrote a series of plays, and they weren't like a technical series, but they all began to expose and discuss issues having to do with Victorian social norms, kind of an idea, and the morality of the Victorian era. That began with A Doll's House, which is also another very famous play. Ghosts, then he wrote Enemy of the People, and then The Wild Duck. Then he also wrote another play later in his life that he was very famous for called Hedda Gabler. The things I found very interesting about this, that he has a lot of female protagonists in the Victorian era, which was definitely odd. In Ghosts, in A Doll's House and Ghosts, both of his protagonists, these women, are very interesting characters, are the strong moral center, even though that often goes against social norms. And even in Ghosts, he brings up venereal disease, which was not only completely unspoken of, but you certainly didn't bring out the idea that that was a problem and that one should go against social norms in order to avoid it.
You know, and that's how we are in this piece right here. Suddenly, we're in the 1800s, we're in the mid-1800s, and he's talking to us about the environment and about environmental concerns, and he's just moving us right into this. And so, as Aaron has so pointed out so very well, he's the father of modern drama, because he's bringing up these powerful issues that affect us, and how he could see issues of feminism, issues of venereal disease, and other areas is just astonishing. So where would you like to start with this piece, Larry? What would be, most interesting for you? Do you want me to tell you a little bit about what's going on as we jump into it?
Yeah, why don't we start there?
Well, what happens is we've got a mayor and we've got his brother. The brother is a brilliant physician. He has a very strong daughter, and his wife is quite strong as well. And he's gone off to medical school.
And the daughter is grown. She's a school teacher. Yeah, so you get
she's
the
a school teacher. And while he's in medical school, he says, I've got a great way for us to make money. I've figured out how the town can have a new industry. We'll do these baths. This is exactly how you must construct the baths. So he tells them how it must be done. Well, when he graduates from medical school, he is hired to direct the baths. But instead of people coming in and getting healed as they're supposed to, he finds they get more sick. And so he does an analysis of the bath waters and finds out that it's full of typhus and all kinds of awful, awful germs. And as we move into this excerpt, he's delighted that he's found out this about the baths and why people are getting sick. And now they can close down the baths. They can route them the proper way instead of having them go through the tannery outside of town where they'd pick up a lot of terrible germs. Then they can reroute this and have the baths productive again in a few years. So what's the problem?
Yeah, as you're reading it, you think, and as you're reading, you think, well, of course, there's a problem here. We've got to solve it.
Right.
And that is Dr. Stockman's, attitude too. He's a
Sure.
scientist, and he's seen science is the servant of society. And if we've got this information, we should, as you say, Elaine, he's excited. He's thrilled that, we've found out what the problem is.
But boy, his brother is so angry.
His brother, the mayor, reads the same report,
It's like a threat.
reads, what the problem is, but sees it differently. How does he see it?
He sees it as a threat to the community, their economy. He knows that it's too expensive and would take too long and would frighten the people, and they wouldn't have as much of the people's trust.
Yeah.
It's a big issue with him.
And it's primarily the economic base, because it will cost. Do you remember how much?
100,000?
Crowns. I mean, several
Yeah.
100,000
Right.
crown to update the technology to fix the problem. And not only that, how long would it take to repair it?
Did they say 2 years?
2 years.
Yeah.
So for 2 years, there'll be no income. So it's like, not only are we having to spend a lot, we're not even going to be able to
Yeah.
be having an income while we're doing it. Okay. Yeah.
But if the water is bad and people are getting sick, are they not going to lose customers anyway? Is it not going to lessen the prosperity of this community anyway? People are getting more sick than healed.
Yeah, are they not realizing that, or the
Word's
source of
going to
their...
get out?
Yeah.
And then they'll be mistrusted even more than if they had said, well, we found a problem, we're fixing it immediately, and it'll take 2 years, but we're fixing it.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than it slowly and gradually, and people said, you knew about this for how long and you never told us? They're going to lose trust that way, I would think.
Okay. Comments over here.
I was trying to find the quote where Dr. Stockman accuses his brother of not wanting to go public with it because he's afraid it would just look bad on him.
Left column of 412.
Do you want to
Thank
read
you.
that, John?
Yeah.
Left column of 412.
Yep.
412?
Before you do, I want to just
432,
walk
you
through
mean?
this and summarize some of the points.
Okay.
On one hand, we're seeing that people are being hurt.
Okay.
Oh, 430.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And so that's a major factor. The other factor is we're losing money. So
Which could
that's
hurt.
another part of the equation. Then you're bringing up, but what about the long-term result there? Okay, I just wanted to.
And it's 432.
It's 432, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't
And
read
then
it
I think
right.
what you're going to get to, so there's the financial on one side, there's also reputation. And the embarrassment of, oh, this was my project, because the mayor was very much behind it as well.
And we've always got to save face. In politics, there seems to be this need to save
And that's a
face.
very important issue that, we're sitting here in the Ethics Cafe,
Yeah.
and we're
Yeah.
not affected by it. And so we can make these decisions, but if it were, try to personalize it. If it were my reputation,
And your pocketbook, Aaron.
those do become factors. I mean, they don't have to be the slam dunk, but they are factors we need to address. So yeah, thanks for bringing those up.
Okay,
And,
I'll go ahead and read it. The mayor says, I said before that I am not convinced that there is any actual danger. And the doctor replies, oh, you aren't. Anything else is impossible. My report is an absolute fact. The only trouble is that you and your administration were the ones who insisted that the water supply be built where it is, and now you're afraid to admit the blunder you committed. Damn it. Don't you think I can see through it all? And the mayor says, all right, let's suppose that's true. Maybe I do care a little bit about my reputation, which is an admission. I mean, he's just coming out and kind of saying it. I will say I do it for the good of the town. Without moral authority, there can be no government. And that is why, Thomas, it is my duty to prevent your report from reaching the board. Sometime later, I will bring up the matter for discussion. In the meantime, not a single word is to reach the public.
So, Aaron, your point on that.
My point was just that that Peter Stockman, the mayor, is not simply coming from a place of the finance or the community. He's not a complete humanitarian in this perspective. He has something to lose here as well, and his argument against his brother is about what he has to lose. On a personal level, as well as these other things.
And bringing this up, and I'm going to, this isn't necessarily my position here, but Dr. Stockman is a very passionate person, and sometimes he borders on maybe the non-rational. He's very excited. He will sometimes, and his history is sometimes he does, he's melodramatic, and his brother sees him as exaggerating things. So the mayor is saying, oh, I think you're just exaggerating. It's not as great a threat as you're presenting. We need, in fact, I talked to I talked to the city engineer, and he said it's not as great a problem as you're suggesting. So with these factors of the financial, and maybe your science isn't as thorough and complete as you're saying it is. Maybe not the reason, but the rationalization.
What does the city engineer know about people's health? They know about city engineering.
Is he a legitimate authority figure?
I'm just saying as part of a logical argument. I don't know that his appeal to the city engineer is necessarily one that Dr. Stockman is certainly going to see as something.
Yeah.
I really like your saying that, because absolutely it is appealing to a false authority. It's probably this city engineer that got them into this hot water, to use a pun, to begin with, saying, oh, there's an easier and cheaper route. Let's do this easier, cheaper route. But Dr. Stockman is saying, no, it needed to be constructed away from the tannery, not having it go through the tannery where all these contaminants from the dead animals are put into this bathwater that's supposed to bring on good health. So the city engineer may have been one of the roots of the problem.
And I think it's an important contrast, because Peter Stockman, who's the mayor, is obviously concerned with his reputation, what he has to lose. But Dr. Stockman is also invested. Not only was he one of the people who came up with the idea, and he's the doctor for the Institute, but his father-in-law, essentially adopted father-in-law, is the guy who owns the tannery where all the water's running through. And therefore, when they move this, he's going to come out looking like this horrible person. And Dr. Stockman and his wife stand to lose a lot of money that comes into their family because of this adoptive father-in-law. And so it's not like Dr. Stockman is choosing to protect himself here by coming forth with this.
But he is naive, I think. I'm glad you've read this play, but he's naive, because it turns out his father-in-law is just about as nasty and cunning as Machiavelli.
It is.
Or as the advice given to him, and he's going to weigh in and say, if you close down these baths, you make any more fuss about my tannery, you're not going to get your inheritance. So yeah, in this story, I'm glad you've read the whole play. In this part of the story, he doesn't weigh in, but he does weigh in, and more pressure gets put on Dr. Stockman, so that at the beginning of the play, we think the mayor is the enemy of the people. We have no doubt. By the time you get to the end of the play, it's like Dr. Stockman is helpless and seen as the enemy of the people.
And the community sees him as that.
And it comes down almost to like we had with Steve Kovac on our vote, no vote. Now it's who's the enemy of the people? This guy who wants to come in and close down the baths for 2 years and broadcast to the world that there's a problem? Or is it the mayor who wants to secretly let people come in and get very sick, but secretly see if they can't get enough money so they can get the baths taken care of?
Even within the section that we have in our textbook, Dr. Stockman is already being, pressured, the screws being tightened on, because we read that if he counters their argument saying, "Oh, there's not a problem," he's threatened to lose his job. And that becomes a factor. I mean, because the issue here is a common one that we hear: whistleblowing. How much are you willing to risk for a cause?
I'm so glad that you identified the word, because it's so big in business ethics, and you can see he's a whistleblower. And now the whole town is saying, do not blow the whistle on us. Erin.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, and he doesn't let it go. In the end of this play, Dr. Stockman goes on to rent a hall, to do everything he can, and he, in the end, has this great line about, and again, I'm paraphrasing here, but that the strongest man is the man who stands absolutely alone.
Yes.
Because in the end, that's what he does. He has no one left. And I think it's important, too, to just bring up
But his daughter.
Yes.
The
but
strong daughter.
He does bring up, you have to know, too, that Ibsen wrote this play in a response to all the people who hated his other plays.
And particularly Ghosts, which was just
previous to this. So it wasn't, and that they made him change endings, and that they had problems with the things, and it wouldn't be shown in Germany and Italy. So it's not just what's on the surface here about the business ethics and the whistleblowing, but about how we treat people who say anything about the norm.
This play was, during Ibsen's career, decades, 40 years was it, he was writing plays. He wrote a play about every 2 years. And this was the play that came in right behind. There was not a 2-year gap between Ghosts and this one, that he was already, these ideas were forming in his head because of the reaction. And I believe he even said that Dr. Stockman probably represented himself, his own voice, more than any of his other plays, or as much as any of the other ones.
What do you think about the environmental concerns that are brought up in this play written in the 1800s?
Okay, some of the first comments that we made about Ibsen, you know, the founder, the father of the modern drama, and addressing social issues. Dollhouse, boy, there was a revival of the popularity of that play in the 1970s with the merging women's movement. And this one here, Enemy of the People, I think especially plays. I mean, we could probably go down every couple of years a big issue. The Pinto is probably the one that stands out a couple decades ago, which put Ralph Nader, I believe, on the map.
And
Where
the
what was it?
Corvair.
There were many people driving the Pinto that if they were in an accident, the car would explode into flames. And they found out, the Ford Pinto realized it was just a small little 19-cent part that needed to be replaced. Now, of course, that comes out as, you know, we think 19 cents in these people's lives. Well, of course, it would have been more money because they would have had to recall, you know, do that.
And
But
reputation.
human life. And they did the calculation. In fact, I've even seen the memo of it. That they did the math that, well, it's not going to happen that often, but you know, the insurance policies versus how much it would pay to do this, it would cost more to replace it financially than to pay the insurance companies.
It's an amazing case, isn't it?
And
this gives us such a strong case too. And we're out of time for today. But you know, it's been such a great discussion with you, Larry. You are just a brilliant professor, and I love the points that you've brought up on this. Thank you so much.
It's always a pleasure to come here and work with you.
Oh, thank you. Years and years we've done this together. And thanks to you students too. Bye-bye.